Welcome to our Expert Perspectives series, where we showcase insights from leading experts in complex product, systems, and software development. Covering industries from medical devices to aerospace and defense, we feature thought leaders who are shaping the future of their fields. I'm Kenzie Ingram, your host, and today I'm excited to welcome Philip Koopman and Neil Stroud to our series. Philip Koopman is a leading expert in embedded systems and autonomous vehicle safety, with a career spanning critical systems, embedded control networks, distributed embedded systems, and software safety. Neil Stroud is Jama Software's own general manager of Automotive and Semiconductor. He brings over 30 years of experience to the conversation, with the last 17 as an industry leader in functional safety domain. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Philip and Neil.
Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Stroud, General Manager of our Automotive and Semiconductor business here at Jama Software. I'm honoured today to be joined by Professor Philip Koopman. Phil, I'm going to hand over to you to do the introduction because you will do a way better job of it than I will.
Hi, I'm Phil Koopman, and I've been doing self-driving car safety and embedded systems for a really long time. Self-driving car safety, not quite 30 years, but we're getting pretty close. And embedded systems for even longer. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, although I'm currently sort of finishing up that job. By the time this airs, I'll be on my last sabbatical on my way to retirement from the university. That doesn't mean I'm going to sit on the beach the rest of my life. It's time for a personal pivot. And at Carnegie Mellon, I've been teaching embedded systems and doing a lot of work on automotive safety, software safety, but also a whole bunch of other different application domains, just too many to list, all over the place. So that's kind of what I do for a living right now.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to go in many different directions, and we're going to talk about safety and autonomous vehicles and all kinds of things. Many folks will know you, of course, as a very influential and critical voice around the world of autonomy and safety.
I prefer not critical so much as advocating safety.
Oh, well, okay.
If I'm critical, I'm just advocating safety. If people have a contrary view, you can decide what you think about that.
Indeed. But before we get there, I'm interested to learn how you kind of got into all of this, because if I think about, I've been doing functional safety for 20 years and I had no plans at all. It wasn't even on my radar to get into this industry. I kind of tripped and fell into it. It served me very well. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your story. How did you get here?
To a degree, I tripped and fell into it too. But the longer, we have enough time, the longer story, it's a really long story in details, but the longer story is back in high school, I was in an organization called 4-H, which is for farm kids, right? And we had a farm, we had cows, but I lived in a city school district, so it's sort of an interesting setup. And as part of it, if for those from the US who are familiar with Boy Scouts, and I'm sure there's a UK analog, right? There's a thing called an Eagle Scout, which is sort of pinnacle. Well, there's a comparable thing in 4-H, a very, very parallel thing. Although I point out 4-H is co-ed, and there's some advantages to that, especially when you're in high school and teenager. But my thing was bicycle safety, it turned out.
Okay.
And so I taught hundreds and hundreds of kids basic bicycle safety, which was sort of interesting. Now, I wasn't planning on making a career of it. That just sort of part of how I fell into it. That was the angle that would get me the to the end goal. And so that was fine. That worked fine for me. Then I drove submarines for a living. And I wasn't really the safety officer, but actually I was the electrical safety officer, but that's sort of like an incidental job. It's more like if you're going to sleep a couple dozen meters from a nuclear reactor every night, and there are other sources of nuclear radiation which shall not be spoken of also around, you sort of take safety kind of seriously. Oh yeah, and there's this several inch thick steel hull, and if there's a hole in it, all the water comes into the people tank, and that's really bad for the people. So safety's kind of on your mind, right? And that kind of, it's an extremely hazardous environment. And then I got out of the Navy, got a PhD, eventually ended up at United Technologies, which has a bunch of embedded applications. Back then, they had not yet. Right now, they sort of specialized, but back then they owned everything from elevators to car equipment to radars and sonars and jet engines and all sorts of stuff. And I did air conditioners and I did elevators. I touched everything, but I also did some automotive back then. Oh yeah, and along the way, I was a chip designer of an automotive CPU. So I picked up some automotive experience there. And then I ended up at Carnegie Mellon University. So I was a chip designer. I did embedded applications at Carnegie Mellon, and I was doing software robustness because DARPA gave us some funding for software robustness, which is kind of cool. It's not really safety, but it's reliability, dependability. And then Carnegie Mellon ran a car across the U.S., a couple 3,000 miles, 98% hands off the wheel. Self-steering car. They just used regular cruise control, but it was on a highway, so that was fine. Mm-hmm. But it was doing optical flow. I think it was a very primitive neural network, but it wasn't neural networks like we know them today. It was basically an optical flow algorithm, following the lines. And if there were no lines, it would follow the scratches in the pavement or the oil drips or the tire wear or the whatever. And it was remarkably good. And if it's raining, the pavement wear puts lines into the rain. It just figured it out. 98%. That last 2% was mostly off ramps, have better lines than the road because they're not as worn. So it loved to take off ramps. And when it went underneath an overpass in bright sunlight, the auto contrast adaptation freaked out. And it just said, I don't know what's going on because the camera flaked out. And that was most of the 2% because it's interstate highways. There's just not a lot going on for a single car making a single trip.
Right.
And ever since, they've been working on that last 2% still today. But after that, there was a bigger thing called the Automated Highway Systems. And there was a consortium not run by NHTSA, run by Federal Highways to automate the highways. And Carnegie Mellon put a couple city buses on a highway with that kind of technology and some of their cars driving around, again, 98%-ish, right? And they're like, maybe safety should be a thing. And they had some funding and I needed some funding. So I became their safety guy because I knew something about reliability, dependability. And that was in the mid 90s. That's how I got into self-driving car safety. It's like right place, right time, right opportunity. Back in the Navlag crew. And we're talking 10 years before any of the Grand Challenge stuff happened. Yeah. It's a completely separate effort, way before Grand Challenge. And there are a few of us, like one or two or three. No, there's at least two. I know at least one other, maybe a third, who were doing safety back then. And that was about it, right? There were not a lot.
Yeah.
And so I got into self-driving car safety then, and it's come and gone. And I've done a ton of other embedded things, hundreds of design reviews, not on cars. But safety always just keeps popping up, doing a design review on a flow control valve for a petrochemical plant. Kind of matters, right? Things go boom if that messes up. So I've touched a whole bunch of safety standards, but it's turned out that once self-driving cars got hot, well, there I was back into self-driving car safety. So it's a long, winding, but you asked the question, here's where we are. Here's how I got here.
No, so fascinating history there. Very, very interesting. And
so this has seen a lot of stuff. That version has seen a lot of stuff.
And that's where I was going to go to. You obviously touched so many different markets and so many different sides and aspects of embedded.
And I've got my 32-bit CPU chip wafers on my wall.
Oh, wow.
I designed it. First silicon worked. This is before Verilog VHDL. So it was, laid out, we use standard cells. So it was TTL logic.
Yeah.
If anyone remembers those.
Yeah.
And first silicon worked 2.5 micron. Not 2.5 nanometer, 2.5 micron, right?
Indeed.
Wrote the test vectors myself. That was a blast. And then we were pretty competitive with the cars. So it was it almost became the Ford electronic controller for the 2000s, but didn't. So I think Motorola beat us out. That's life. I was at Harris. We were the small guys. Yeah. And then after a while, I said, that's all fun. I've got my CPU. It was a blast. I have no regrets whatsoever. But I'm kind of enjoying the application side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I got more into system architecture and software. And so I certainly know about hardware, but I spend more of my time on the firmware, hardware interface and up through the software.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so let's Let's think about requirements just a little bit, because that's kind of one of the reasons we're here. Obviously, it's near and dear to Jama's heart.
Right to requirements. Okay.
Yeah, but I want to kind of up level a little bit, because when I think about all the verticals, whether they're safety critical or security critical or just straight designs, some of the market segments are further along than others. Typical ones, if I think about it, aviation and defense, or indeed automotive.
Yeah,
those guys typically understand the value of
probably in that order, and probably in that order. Yeah,
and probably in that order as well. Yes,
yes.
But compared with maybe other industries that are kind of new to the game, like insurance or some of these, new growth segments that have never really had to care about requirements before,
Sure.
There are guys out there who've been doing this for a long time and get the value of, at least in theory, doing things in the right order of requirements first, then do a design, then test, and then launch a high quality product.
Yeah.